Global Dialogue Series, which we bring to you in association with the Indian High Commission here in the UK. I'm Manoj Ladwa. Our guest today is a man. Good morning and welcome from London for this latest edition of External Affairs Minister Global Dialogue Series. Jaishankar. To you in Dr. Jaishankar, good morning and welcome to London here in the UK.
Morning, Manoj.
I'm Manoj Ladwa. Our guest today is a man. Good morning and welcome from London as a straight-talking guy of External Affairs Minister Global Dialogue Series. Television screen bring to you in association with good morning social media here in the UK. Channels.
Morning, Manoj.
I'm Manoj Ladwa, and we're deeply worried. Our guest today is a man. Good morning and welcome your attendance as a straight-talking guy of External Affairs Minister Global Dialogue Series. Television screen bring to you in association with good morning social media here in the UK. Channels. I'm Manoj Ladwa, and we're deeply worried. Guest today is a man and welcome your attendance as a straight-talking guy.
They have reason.
Global Dialogue television screen bring to you good morning social media here in the UK. Channels. I'm Manoj Ladwa, and we're deeply worried. Guest today is a man and welcome your attendance as a straight-talking guy.
They have reason.
Global Dialogue
And I think people in the UK understand social media because they went through something very, very similar. It has been extremely at the end of the year. They have reasons. And I think people in the UK understand about Korea. At that time we were watching in India, worrying about extremely at the end of the year. And there were big days at that time. And I think people in the UK reasons of Korea. At that time we were watching in India something like that is really happening in a bigger country at the end of the year. And there were big days, and in fact it had the same variant to a lot of UK reasons of Korea. Rapidly we were watching in India something like that is really we have a second one as well at the end of the year. And there were big days, and in fact it had the same variant to a lot of yesterday's daily increase was about 380,000, I think is my recollection. So things are very serious, and it's something we are. I mean, at this time, very frankly, it's the all-consuming issue for us.
Yes, but Dr. Jaishankar, how do you respond to the accusations or the concerns that India has been somehow complacent in this second wave, and that your government has taken its eye off the ball?
Well, look, I don't think that is fair, either in terms of diagnosing the problem or really in assessing how the government has responded to it. And I'll tell you why. Manoj, I will walk you back to where we were 2 months ago, 2-3 months ago. Okay, end of February, we were looking at less than 10,000 cases a day. Yesterday's figure, as I told you, was 380,000. So it's kind of gone up 38 times. It tells you how much more virulent the virus is. And you get these graphs. I mean, this graph is like that. And just so that you really understand, the how fast this spread, how the challenges just in a sense exploded. A month at the end of March, if you took a parameter of districts which report 100 cases or more every day, these were about 75 districts. Within 1 month, these 75 districts became 450 districts, 456. Similarly, if you looked at the positivity rate, suppose you use 15% positivity rate, there were 40 plus districts, if my memory serves me right, reporting that at the end of March. Now, from 40 plus, it went up to 360. So you've got to understand, really intensity, the enormity, and you will understand, because that's exactly what, in a sense, UK went through at the end of the year. Now, did we take our eyes off the ball? Look, from the peak of the first wave was mid-September. Okay, after mid-September, we saw a kind of a decline. Now, even though there was a decline, again, let me walk back here a bit. What happened during the first wave, and the first wave also caught us unprepared. After all, nobody had foreseen a pandemic of this magnitude and intensity. But we scrambled in the first wave as a country, as a society, as people, to get our masks, our ventilators, our PPEs, our testing kits. That was the focus of the effort. And yes, it came at a great cost. I think the lockdown was a very painful decision. I still think it was a very effective decision at that point of time. But we had kind of over that summer, autumn of 2020, we had done what we could to deal with that particular wave. Now, what we saw as the year came to an end and we turned the year, there were still states where, the sort of, it had come down, but it was a kind of a long tail which really showed no signs of ending. Particularly Maharashtra, I think, was a state of concern. Kerala was a state of concern. So through I would say October, November, December, all the way actually till the second wave hit us, there were repeated advisories going out from the the public health specialists at the capital to states. There were meetings in the governance process, the cabinet secretary, the health secretary. There were actually teams which were sent out, public health teams. In fact, my recollection is between I would say September, October, and March. There were as many as 75 teams which went out to the states, and the teams were sent saying, "Look, folks, you've got an issue. There's something we are picking up here, which is a concern." And along with that, actually, because of the concerns generated by the first wave, there was a big move really to ramp up oxygen production. And in fact, the government had authorized more than 1,200 oxygen plants. Money had been given to states because, in India, health is a state subject. So now the reality, unfortunately, was as numbers came down, there was a certain amount of, I would say, public confidence. Now, people, after all, wanted public confidence at that time because you wanted to revive the economy. So if you look at the mood of the country, because today it's very easy to say, you should have seen that coming and kept up your guard all the time. But what was the mood of the country at the beginning of the year, which was to get the economy going, get normalcy back? Now, what happened, though, which was as the numbers went down, the attempt to instill confidence, which was completely understandable, created the kind of societal complacency that I think all of us are part of. I really can't think, I mean, in a sense, to me today, this is genuinely not a blame game, because when you say did we keep up our guard all the way, I don't think there's anybody honestly in the country who would say that we did. And understandably, because in February your numbers were 10,000.
Yes, I see the point. And the question that keeps coming back, and we're getting this on our chat box as well, is, and I'd like you to try and address this directly as possible. That the mass gatherings that took place, the election rallies, is that would you say in hindsight that that was a mistake, or where do you draw the line on that?
Look, Manoj, in fact, I was asked this question yesterday as well, and it's a very active point of debate in India. First of all, when it comes to elections, in a democratic country, you can't not have elections. We saw in the 70s one occasion when elections were denied in a sense and then delayed. But we are a deeply democratic country. We're a deeply political country. Think of it. Look at the contrafactual scenario. Suppose the government had said at that time that let's not do the election. Imagine what would be the reaction. Because, and this is not theoretical. A year ago, when we did the lockdown, we did the lockdown because it was very clear that as a society, we were not prepared for the pandemic, and that was the only way out. But yet, I have seen, for example, in this Freedom House report, that we did the lockdown, to deal with the CAA protests. Now, it's one of those, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. My sense is, when it comes to, elections are sacrosanct. Okay. Now, the second issue raised was the crowd issue. Okay. Now, to some degree, you can say it was apparent as events came along. But, there were crowds and crowds. It can't be that religious crowds are a problem, but protest crowds are fine. Because at the end of the day, a crowd is a crowd is a crowd. So, yes, with the benefit of hindsight, it's very easy for people to say we shouldn't have allowed gatherings of any kind. But remember, a year ago, we were actually being pilloried for doing exactly that. I put it to you this way. We are a deeply political society, and I think it's a good thing. That is what keeps our civil society going. That the argumentation is something we all draw strength and ideas from. And I would never shy away from it. I would never, tell anybody that it's not your place to argue with me. I don't think we are that kind of society and people. But I think there are times when we can discuss that to our heart's content. But there are times when we need to pull up our socks and say, look, there's a crisis which is almost, in a sense, existential for the people who are affected by it. This is a time when let's sort of put the blame game aside. Let's look at what we can do. And, that's to some extent been the tradition in many other societies which have gone through a similar situation.
Yes. And I want to come on to another point which keeps coming up, and that is about vaccinations. And your ministry led the Vaccine Maitri, or the vaccine diplomacy drive, where millions of these doses of vaccines produced in India were distributed to countries around the world. Would you now say, in hindsight,
including UK.
would you
many
now
of you
say,
would have been vaccinated by vaccines produced in India.
Yes, but look, the point I want to make here is that, do you think in hindsight that perhaps you could have calibrated that better so that there could have been more vaccines for Indians? And I'm just coming to a specific question that I'm seeing on the chat box from Amitabh Sharma in the UK, who's saying that how do you decide how much vaccine supply to export versus to store for Indian citizens? How do you strike that balance?
I think first of all, Manoj, you got to understand that our vaccine situation, our vaccine production situation was somewhat different from many other countries. Okay, different in a sense certainly from the United States, to some extent from Europe as well. And I'll tell you why. Ask yourself, on what basis did India, this made in India vaccine, the larger one, Covishield, on what basis was it being made in India? Okay, because it is a Oxford Group AstraZeneca vaccine. Okay, in that sense, it's a British, you could say, British designed product. Okay, now it was made in India because the owner of the vaccine saw India as a very efficient production venue. So along with that ability to make in India, the approvals to make in India, came an obligation to supply it to a large part of the world. Okay, so so the first thing people have to understand, it was not that the vaccine production started in India. It was invented by an Indian, owned by an Indian, produced by an Indian. It was a truly international collaboration. And when there is an international collaboration, if somebody gave you a vaccine to make in India, then obviously you have to do your part, otherwise it doesn't work. So that's your first point. Your second point was it also came with support from the COVAX initiative. So there was an obligation to support the COVAX initiative to give vaccines at low cost to a number of nations. Now, when we started our vaccination, we looked at the vaccination scheduling, and obviously the idea was that the public health people had thought it through, which was you do your health worker, doctors and health workers, then you do your frontline workers, you do your military, you do your police, then you do your over 60s, then so there was a sort of sequence. Now, vaccines also have a shelf life. Bear that in mind. So some of the production had started in advance of the actual usage of the vaccine. So I think we had a process within the government involving all the concerned ministries saying, this is the production, these are our obligations, this is the consumption. And by the way, there was in some cases our own immediate concerns, like our immediate neighbors, with whom, you wanted their doctors and health workers because you didn't want a pandemic right across your doorstep. So I think an effort was made to strike that balance. And we kept to that balance till, as far as we could. And then as the demands in India mounted, we leveled with all the others concerned, saying that, look, surely you will understand right now that I have to purpose all the vaccines in India, made in India, within India itself. And I must tell you, without fail, without exception, everyone, and I've spoken to a number of foreign ministers across the world, every one of them understood that. But there's one last point, because that's also a factor. It was not that our vaccine production is a constant and we knew or was predictable. We had a certain sense from industry, from the two vaccine producers currently, as well as those who are coming on stream very, very shortly, that there will be a certain scaling up which would happen. But what we then found was, and this really was started to be visible in, I would say, February and early March, was that the raw material inflow to expand to do the predictable expansion in capacity, that wasn't coming. That wasn't coming because there were other pull factors, particularly towards the United States. But and you have to understand again, a vaccine is a very, very complex product. Someone told me that there are as many as 300 companies from 30 countries from whom we actually source materials to put it together to make the vaccine. So from, I would say, March onwards, we in MEA have been really focused in approaching other countries. Some of it became public, some of it Some of it was public even then, some became public later, some of it even now, we prefer to have effective conversations rather than publicized conversations. And we've been pressing countries saying, look, please keep your vaccine raw material flow open. And I can tell you, I've spoken to, and my ambassadors have taken it up with a number of countries to make sure that this keeps going. And it didn't go, we didn't get that higher gradient that we hoped for.
Yeah, and I guess one of the points you're making here is that there are many lessons that should have been learnt as well and will be learnt in relation to this entire situation. And another question that is coming up in the minds of a lot of foreign watchers and NRIs is about the healthcare infrastructure of India. That on the one hand, we saw, as you've rightly said, the very best of India when it comes to the manufacture of pharmaceutical products and so on. But on the other side, we've seen India's healthcare system extremely exposed. And so I want to invite you to explain or see, what do you see in terms of the lessons for the future as far as India's healthcare infrastructure is concerned?
Well, short answer, Manoj, is absolutely. A healthcare system stands exposed. Very clear that over 75 years we have underinvested in health. Maybe there were reasons. It's very easy to say today that you should have put in more money. I mean, I can now that I am in the government, and that too at a level where I see policies in other domains being made, I can tell you it's not as easy as it sounds. And this is not a defense of today's situation. I'm saying this over 75 years. And in fact, it is that realization, which is why the Prime Minister was pushing for Ayushman Bharat. Because we had reached a stage where the Prime Minister genuinely believed that, we cannot leave our people to the vagaries of the private practitioners, however good they may be. There has to be a strong governmental system, which, beyond roti, kapda and makan, there's got to be, other than employment, health is a basic right of people. But having said that, you have what you have at this point of time, which is an underinvested health sector over many, many decades. Now, I can, respond to this by saying, well, that's what I have, but that's not a good enough answer in a crisis. So in a crisis today, even though I have limitations, I have to make that, extra effort, find some way by which I can respond to today's crisis. If somebody is sick and somebody is looking for oxygen and somebody is looking for remdesivir, they're not going to listen to policy explanations. They want to see practical answers on the ground, which is why at this moment, let me give you an example, which is the oxygen example. Look, because this, what we are seeing with 117 and 1617 is a far more virulent virus. And what I hear from doctors is that the respiratory problems are coming on perhaps earlier than they did and in larger numbers than they did in the previous wave. There's a huge demand for oxygen. Now, medical oxygen demand, so that people have a sense of the problem, has gone up from a little more over 1,000 metric tons consumption to something between 7,500 to 8,000. So you have a 7x, 8x increase in demand. And it's my obligation as government to meet it. I have to move heaven and earth, but I have to meet it in some way. And we are seeing, today, I mean, if you follow, for example, what's happening on the oxygen situation, that we've encouraged businesses to sort of change their production practices to free up oxygen, industrial oxygen, and convert it into medical oxygen. We're running trains. I mean, the Piyush Goyal ji is running oxygen expresses so that oxygen comes to the population centers, because the production centers are very distant. Even the tank, when you speak about health infrastructure, we had even oxygen tanker shortages, because if you look at the sort of the total fleet of India, it's really very, very small. I think there were about 1,200 tankers. Now we've tried to convert the nitrogen and argon tankers into oxygen tankers. We've been trying to purchase tankers from abroad and tanks from abroad. In fact, right now, that's really what my missions are doing. They are looking for oxygen cryogenic tanks. They're looking for for generators, for concentrators, and my effort. And the Indian Air Force is actually picking up empty tanks, flying them back so that we save driving time, so that we are able to get 2x, 3x performance out of the same set of assets. So there's a huge effort on out here. I grant you that it's a difficult crisis. It's a very painful crisis, but I can tell you that we are giving it everything we have and more, and people here in London need to know that.
Yes, and thank you for that, those insights. Specifically, and I want to move on to other subjects as well in this conversation, but specifically on the demand for oxygen and the immense efforts that are taking place both in India, and you've alluded to the massive efforts internationally as well. And you've seen the humanitarian efforts of many countries and organizations from across the world that have stood up and supported India in its hour of need. And I know a lot of people watching here have also participated in those efforts. So what would you like to say to those many countries, those peoples and those organizations who have stood by India? And specifically, Dr. Jaishankar, can you assure them that their generous support will reach the front line as quickly and as efficiently as possible?
Yes. I mean, look, first of all, I would say, use this conversation to convey that we are profoundly and deeply grateful to the Indian community in UK, and for those who are watching elsewhere, to community organizations across the world. We value the support, we value the networking. Many of them have helped us in very, very interesting ways. I've had people step forward who made airline space available, capabilities available to us. I've had people who helped with shipping, with logistics, with gathering stuff. So we are immensely grateful to all of them. But what is important is, it's in human nature. When you are emotionally involved, you want to do something. It would be very helpful if people, understood what was really in need, because often the logistics of taking something can be quite a challenge. So I wouldn't want a situation that somebody works very hard and does something, but that may not exactly be the priority. So I would urge people through your medium to just be in touch with the embassy, the High Commission, to find out exactly what needs to be done. But while I say this to the community, I would also say we are very, very deeply grateful to all the governments as well. The UK government, for example, is sending oxygen plants, concentrators, cylinders, cryogenic tanks, ventilators. And there are some interesting ideas still under discussion. Again, I want to step back here and tell you that, look, we feel in India at a moment of great travail, a sense that the world is with us. Okay. I speak to so many people, including so many counterparts across, and we are constantly messaging each other saying, I'm doing this. What would you like? Can I help you with that? And we need to ask ourselves, because look, we will get through this, but there is a larger lesson out of all of this. And that lesson is there in what others tell us. Okay. If you had President Biden who says, look, I am changing American policy because India stood by me in the early phase of this crisis. So even though it's my policy not to send out some stuff, I will change this policy for India. The other day I had called up my Singaporean counterpart, Vivian Balakrishnan, and was talking to him about, really thanking him because our first set of oxygen tanks came from there. We sent an Air Force aircraft and they sent an Air Force aircraft. And he actually told me, he said, look, I think you've probably forgotten. Last year we had asked you for something on the pharma side, and you did it without even without a moment's hesitation. And I see this in the Gulf. Today a lot of our oxygen supplies is beginning to come out of the Gulf. Now, in the Gulf, I've spoken to UAE, to Qatar, to Kuwait, to Bahrain, Saudis. All of them said, look, last year you kept supply lines open through the COVID. You sent us medicines. Some of them, you gave us vaccines. So they feel a sense of solidarity. And that sense of solidarity here in London, I feel very much from the G7, because almost all the G7 countries have been through exactly what we have been through. The problem with the pictures you're seeing today, they're not unique. They're terrible. God forbid it happens anywhere else. But remember New York last year. Remember Italy. Remember France. They've been through it. What happened in UK. So they feel for you. I think, look, this pandemic is a truly not just a game changer. It's a thought changer, and it has. At one level, it has shown up some of the darker sides of people, but I, as an optimist, am much more entranced or interested in the on the warmer side of people. I see a solidarity in diplomacy today across, everywhere, which this has brought us together. And I would like to see that at home as well.
Yes, and you mentioned the G7, and you're of course here for the G7 foreign ministers meeting. So apart from COVID, which will, I'm sure, dominate the agenda, what's the most significant item on the G7 agenda from your perspective or from India's perspective now?
Well, Manoj, the G7 and we are four of us are guests here, ourselves, Korea, Australia, and South Africa. Part of it are global, you could say, strategic discussions in a way, but there will be global issues. COVID is right up there. Climate change is very important. SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a big concern that one of the casualties yesterday, both my Australian and my South African counterparts were worried. Both happen to be women. We're worrying that actually there will be a gender cost to COVID, because the stresses in societies will create, choices and shortages, and a lot of the gender progress that we've made will be endangered. So I think there's a lot to discuss, and that's something, the meeting starts in about an hour. So I look forward to that.
Sure. And let's now move on. And I'm seeing a number of questions coming up on the issue of China. And you recently had to speak to your Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, on the importance of China's transport corridors and cargo flights remaining open to facilitate of medical supplies into India. How would you describe the current relationship between India and China, and what's exactly going on the border as well? So, if you could comment a little bit on this.
I'll put it very simply because we are tight on time, Manoj. The relationship right now is going through a very difficult phase. It's going through a very difficult phase because in violation of agreements and understandings of many, many years, the Chinese have deployed a very large part of the military on the and close to the line of actual control, and without explanation. And they continue to be there close. I mean, it's now a year from when it began. And we made it, and their actions have disturbed peace and tranquility in the border areas. We saw bloodshed there last June, unfortunately, after 45 years. So we've been very clear with the Chinese that you can't, peace and tranquility on the border and the border areas is absolutely essential for the development of our relations. I can't have friction, coercion, intimidation, and bloodshed on the border, and then say let's have a good relationship with the in other domains. So it's not realistic. But when it comes to and that's something we have maintained. We are discussing with the Chinese. We've made some progress in some areas. The disengagement progress. Some areas that's still an ongoing discussion, but we haven't come to the de-escalation part of it, which will follow only after disengagement is done. But the last conversation was significantly focused on the COVID, and my discussions essentially were that COVID is something bigger. It's in our mutual interest to work together to deal with it, and that's what my Foreign Minister Wang Yi told me as well. And I said, look, the best way you could help us would be that many of our companies are ordering stuff from China, and we are encountering difficulties in logistics. So please take a look at it, and we would really sort of something which we would appreciate. And I would say after our conversations, things did move. Some of our airlines immediately got their approvals. I think the logistics is the chain is flowing in, and that's something which is very laudable.
Let's now move on to the economy. And despite COVID, what we're seeing is the growth figures for India's economy are still being projected at double digit. So the question I have for you here is, how are you seeing the economic outlook? And we've also received a specific question from Dr. Jay Godinya of Australia, who's asking about the 5 trillion target for India's GDP growth. Do you think that timeline will need to be modified given COVID? I think we've just lost Dr. Jaishankar. I'm sorry about that. If we can just wait a few moments, and hopefully we'll get Dr. Jaishankar back online. We've got you back.
Yeah.
I can see. So, Dr. Jaishankar, I'm not sure if you caught that question, but how are you seeing the economic outlook? And I'm getting a question from Dr. Jay Kundinya from Australia, who's specifically asking about the $5 trillion target and whether, given COVID, we're going to have to look at stretching that particular timeline. How are you seeing things?
Well, no question, Manoj, COVID has extracted an enormous cost of all economies in the world. But it has also taught countries, economies, businesses, policymakers lessons as well. We are far, far more digital in our practices, in our thinking, than we were a year and a half ago. I mean, it's one of the inadvertent outcomes of COVID. So there are efficiencies in the economy which were again compelled by the COVID pressures and stresses. A lot of new capabilities have come up. I mean, one of the big lessons of COVID. There are lessons for India, there are lessons for the world. One of the lessons for India is that, when we say Atmanirbhar Bharat, we had a economic model where we really relied on external efficiencies for our growth, as a result of which more and more of our, the dependence on production was abroad. Now, on paper, there was nothing wrong with it, except that when it's crunch time, like COVID, you found that those external supplies were not delivering. So the need to have greater, today national security means more economic security, more manufacturing security. Atmanirbhar Bharat is very much part of your national security and I would say your sort of path forward in the bigger, broader sense of the term. We have in the government, therefore, been through last year, even while COVID was on, you actually saw a number of reforms. We had this production-linked incentives in 13 sectors, which have already started delivering results in terms of greater investment in manufacturing. There were labor reforms. There were, of course, as you know, farm reforms. There were education reforms. There were financial reforms. So till the second wave hit us, I can tell you there was an enormous sort of optimism about where we were going economically. My sense is this one, we will have to absorb it. There will be a tremendous cost. It's a test of fire we have to come through. But I think the economic foundations, the economic course will remain steady. It will be increasingly bolder and more reformist. I think there are long-awaited changes which we kept kicking the can down the road. And I can tell you, as someone who briefly was in the business world, today when I look at business outlook, and I say this even while we are in the middle of a second wave, I still think, what's most important for me is our own businesses have confidence in our prospects, because they then pass that on to the rest of the world. So I see that sense of optimism even now.
Sure. And so no backtracking on the reform process. That's what you're saying. That's the big message. On
the contrary, I think you are seeing, the government today look at many areas which their predecessors ducked the hard choices. So not just no backtracking. I think if you look at the overall economic vision of this government and of the Prime Minister personally, it's a very, very bold one, and I think he will back that very, very fully.
So in our last few minutes, Dr. Jaishankar, I want to bring us back here to the UK. And yesterday, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Johnson held that long-awaited virtual summit in which an enhanced economic partnership not quite a free trade deal, but an enhanced economic trade partnership was announced. And over $1 billion of investments were also announced. Dr. Jaishankar, would you agree with me that there seems to be a new energy and new ambition between the two countries? And specifically, what outcomes is India seeking to prioritize?
Absolutely. I actually, from London, sat in on the virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Johnson. And I think the new energy, the new thinking, it was very visible as you sort of listened in to the discussions. We've had 4 big outcomes. A very, very detailed roadmap. It's almost like sector by sector things you do across departments, across domains, across policies. A sort of roadmap, not actually a roadmap till 2030. Then on the economic front, we've agreed to the formal name is an enhanced trade partnership, but bottom line is there will be early decisions which will increase trade on both sides. But we will negotiate very seriously and I hope very expeditiously a free trade agreement with the UK. It's a very big step. We would be one of the early countries with which UK has made that decision very formally. We had an innovation partnership agreement. I'm very interested in it because, even if you look at COVID, for example, you can see, a lot of our solutions come by working together, including in areas like vaccines, and our scientists do a lot of talking to each other in genome sequencing, etc. We had a very interesting, I think, agreement with a lot of potential in terms of talent flows. I signed it yesterday with Home Secretary Preeti Patel in the morning, which would encourage more Indian talent to come here and will make it much easier for visa processes. So I think it's something the community should be happy with. In fact, I was told yesterday that in the last few months, there's been a big uptick of Indian talent. More than 58,000 Indians have been, approved for coming to the UK in terms of what they could do, contribute to the economy here and to the world. But beyond all this, there's the political bit, there's the strategic bit, there's the, our world of security and all of that. I see yesterday's summit very much as an inflection point in our contemporary relations. I think we have 2 governments, 2 prime ministers, very determined to take the relationship to a high level. So I think that's something, a message which the community should understand, appreciate, and support.
And but there still remain some irritants. One of the things that I think frustrates India quite a lot is when Indian domestic policies are discussed in the British Parliament. So forgive me for asking this question, but this question keeps coming up, especially amongst the diaspora here, and you've spoken about it in the past as well. But what's your message to the British parliamentarians when such issues, when Indian domestic politics and policies are discussed in the British Parliament?
Well, look, first of all, we believe that the Parliament of one truly democratic country should be very responsible about commenting on the actions and decisions of another parliament. Because once you start doing it, you open up a Pandora's box. Today it's my law or my policy or my proceedings which you're commenting on. tomorrow the tables could be turned. I would have views and comments about what's happening in the parliament out here. So I don't think it helps either party or the relationship to go down that path. The second, of course, is really accurate sense of what is actually happening in India. Look, this is India. We have our processes, we have our debates, we have our arguments, we have our protests. I mean, all of that is part of our polity, just like it happens in the UK. But the kind of language I see used, the kind of characterization, the epithets, I mean, then you realize, okay, this is not about these issues. This is actually some kind of a deeper propaganda game, which is aimed at actually, which has a different agenda, which aims to sour the relationship. We've spoken our mind very honestly. I have done so myself with our counterparts, and I said that the relationship is not well served by this. And I would not like to see this degenerate into squabbles at both ends. I would hope very much that the more responsible, because I think the vast majority of people share the views and hopes that I have expressed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And we're coming close to the end of our conversation. And this is where the customary rapid fire round comes in, if you don't mind, Dr. Jaishankar. And chat box has been extremely busy during our conversation. So if you could just have a look across onto your screen. There are a number of different questions that are coming up, not only from the UK, but from across the world. Why don't you just pick a few and let's go through them.
I see about 5 questions in front of me. One which relates to the Indian legal, foreign investor protection, Indian legal system. My sense is, if you look at the investment flows into India, at the end of the day, money talks. Okay. So it's very clear that I'm not ruling out that there's enormous room for improvement in our policies and practices, but I think the confidence in the Indian economy and in our Indian policies are definitely growing. There's a reference here to the shortages of doctors, nurses, etc. right now. I think that's very much a concern, and I can tell you that the government is looking at what to do about it. I think that's very much part of the internal ongoing debates. There is an issue of dual citizenship. I think a lot of people understand why, the complex nature of that. We think that the OCI process is a reasonable way of dealing with the interests of the diaspora who are abroad. I can also say that there are actually very few countries who have that strong outreach to the diaspora as we do, and certainly under Prime Minister Modi that has become very much stronger. There's a bit about how do you plan to tackle the negative press. My answer here would be largely to let my actions speak for themselves. I do accept that it's in the nature of press to focus on a crisis. After all, that's their profession. Today, they are focusing on India because that's where the crisis is the worst. Do you remember a few months ago they were doing it in the UK itself, or we saw that with the US or Europe as well. There is sometimes I would say a prejudice or a condescension or some baggage which happens, which you find expressed. I mean, I saw that, for example, with how I was actually amazed that there were characterizations of the Indian vaccine, Covaxin, as somehow, the Financial Times actually used the word experimental for it, and as opposed to proven for Western products. So these are the kind of attitudes that we will have to overcome. They will not change in a day. Politics will be politics. Ideology will be ideology. Increasingly in the world, editorial lines overpower the reporter's accuracy. But that's life. There's a reference here to yesterday the migration issue, that you will do this in return for that. I think that the accurate characterization would be really, we want to, we are for legal migration. Illegal migration does not help India reputationally. It encourages all other bad practices and vices. I think the stronger, given we have enormous faith in our people, in our talent, we want to open up the global workplace for them. Yesterday's step was a very, very big step. There's a bit on waiving IPR and how do you get your vaccine production up. Look, my biggest problem right now is how do I get the vaccine supply chains flowing adequately so that the vaccination production increases. I see a lot of questions here, but what I would say, Manoj, if you allow me to use that last 1 minute there, to go back to the title of this session. Does India have a plan? Yes, we have a plan in the sense that we are responding to the immediacy of the second wave, but we have a plan beyond that, which is the immediacy is centered around oxygen, medicines, healthcare support system. But the plan is really to expand vaccination, because vaccinations is the way out of COVID. It's not a silver bullet, but it's as close as anybody can come to it. Do we have an economic plan? Absolutely. The production-linked incentive is a great example of that. But I would say overall, if you can see the reforms, whether it's farm law reforms, whether it's labor reforms, it's part of a larger vision and a plan. Do we have a foreign policy plan? You can see that in operation today. You can see all our relationship, the enormous goodwill that we have accumulated, both historically, but especially in the last 7 years. I think that goodwill today is in full display. That goodwill today is really helping the people of India in their need. And do I have a UK plan? Well, you saw that yesterday. So I have not just Manoj. India has a plan. India has many plans, and our job is to get them all done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar. At the beginning of this conversation, I described you as a straight-talking guy, and you haven't disappointed. Lots of very interesting observations that you've shared with us. Thank you very much for your time. We're so close, but yet so far, which is, I guess, the par for the course these days. But we wish you all the very best in your continued engagements with the UK government and tackling the COVID crisis in the days and weeks to come. So thank you very much. For those that have tuned in, please do log on to indiaincgroup.com, where you'll be able to see the entire interview again and lots of analysis about the comments that Dr. Jaishankar has made as well. So please stay tuned in and look forward to connecting again sometime real soon. Thank you very much. Stay safe and keep smiling, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.